Hello, Star Wars fans. It's now been a year since The Last Jedi, and when we all found out Star Wars was completely doomed. And this occasion deserves an extra long ripping into Disney's Star Wars. In some of my past videos, I've made it a point to mention how the Star Wars universe has been shrinking under the current leadership, nor am I alone in expressing that opinion. But why is it that the Star Wars universe is shrinking in scope, such a widely accepted fact among the Star Wars fanbase? Why is it so apparent to Star Wars fans? The shrinkage of scope is very apparent because any fan of Star Wars has watched the original and prequel trilogies. There is a wide gulf of difference between them. Also, a Star Wars fan might have delved somewhat into the expanded universe, commonly referred to as the EU, which George allowed to be canon, and yet Kathleen Kennedy, Disney, and Lucasfilm threw it all away. So today, I'd like to talk about Disney's Diminishing Universe, or the DDU. One of the most obvious places to start is with the factions present in Disney's sequel trilogy. In Episode 7, The Force Awakens, we have two main factions, the Resistance and the First Order. What's annoying with these factions is that they are just essentially renamed factions that were present during the original trilogy. Those factions being the Rebellion and the Empire. Not only that, the roles haven't changed in the story, despite the Rebellion having killed the Emperor and destroying the second Death Star in the original trilogy. Supposedly, multiple decades have occurred in the storyline, and yet nothing has changed between the warring factions except the names. The Resistance was still the underdog arrayed against a superior force trying to take over the galaxy. The only other real faction of any power they've tried to show was on Casino Bite, and it felt hollow, because they broadly blanketed rich people as the reason for suffering in the galaxy. But just who are these rich people? Where are the details and backgrounds of these rich people? Are there important names we should know? No. They tried to play up Casino Bite as something important, yet in the narrative of the sequel trilogy, it was unimportant. If we look to the EU, after the Battle of Endor, the Rebellion had taken over the majority of the Empire's territory and created the New Republic. The surviving admirals of the Imperial fleet became rogue warlords who ruled over the remnants of the Empire. Their domain was called the Imperial Remnant. They were not super powerful. The Rebellion had created a whole new government. And as for other factions in the EU, there's stuff like the Chiss Ascendancy, the Hapen Consortium, which is ran by women, or the Sith Empire. There's famous crime bosses, pirates, and bounty hunters. So much lore available, and yet Kathleen pissed it all away. The roles of the Rebellion and the Empire had changed in a credible way, considering the Empire's defeat at Endor. With the way the story played out in the EU, you might even say that the story of Star Wars expanded. But instead of the natural progression after the original trilogy, Disney Star Wars instead copied everything from the original trilogy and directly pasted the contents 30 years into the future. However, because Lucasfilm lazily copy and pasted the original trilogy, Lucasfilm needed a way to pretend like the new trilogy was instead something fresh. So they brought in the older established characters to give their efforts some legitimacy. Which leads into my next point. They've been replacing established characters with new inferior copies. Take Admiral Akbar, for example. He proves his leadership by being the one to tell everyone the plans to destroy the second Death Star. And when the Battle of Endor is taking place, he is shown calmly giving understandable orders in the midst of battle. He is shown to be competent and deserving of his rank. He was a great character and acted appropriately. But he was off-screened in Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and his replacement was Admiral Holdo, a character whose backstory was told to us instead of shown to us. She is unwilling to share her plans, makes irrational decisions in the context of the situation, allows for a mutiny, shows zero competency, and is a far inferior character than Admiral Akbar. And then she dies. They killed an established character to replace him with an inferior version, and then killed off the inferior version. And yet, what Admiral Holdo accomplished at the end could have been accomplished by Admiral Akbar, which means that any screen time for Admiral Holdo was essentially time filler fluff. And now there's no Admiral left in the sequel trilogy. Han Solo and Luke Skywalker are dead. and certain aspects and dimensions of their characters have been spread among several new characters. And these new characters are so one-dimensional that they have become caricatures of actually good characters. Even the big bad in the sequel trilogy is inferior, since Snoke died in a terrible way, and his apprentice Kylo Ren is his replacement in Episode 8. Someone who was still training is now the new big bad. And all that is just talking about the sequel trilogy. Let's move on to the side stories. Look at the time frame for Rogue One and Solo. They take place between the prequels and the original trilogy. Disney literally has the Empire and the Rebellion fighting in all 4 of their movies so far. They can't come up with new factions. And with the same factions all the time, we are seeing the same space battles taking place, except with different numbers of ships. Because they don't come up with new ship designs. Because they don't have to. So when Disney/Lucasfilm is staging their side stories in such a lazy way, it's no wonder fans are of the opinion that Disney Star Wars is shrinking in scope. The side stories are just unnecessary backstory with nothing new. And the sequel trilogy is simply the original trilogy with some slight alterations. Disney's/Lucasfilm's take on Star Wars is truly an example of going for the low-hanging fruit. Now, if Lucasfilm had put some effort into the franchise, they could have done anything. The opening line of Star Wars is literally a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That is so open-ended that Lucasfilm could stick the title of Star Wars onto any genre of movie that took place in space. Their stories could have taken place at any period of time with any level of technology. All they would have to do is ensure the quality of the film. Yet Disney/Lucasfilm have lazily stuck with what's already been done. And we the fans know it's lazy because of what George Lucas has accomplished with his 2 trilogies. Instead of the Rebellion and the Empire, we got to explore the Old Republic, the Trade Federation, the culture of Naboo, the culture of the Kaminoans, the Separatists, the Jedi Temple, the workings of Tatooine, the culture of Geonosis, and the Empire only formed at the very end of the prequels. Imagine if George Lucas had been lazy and set the prequels at the start of the Empire forming. That's what Disney would have done if it had been up to them, considering what they've produced so far. Or maybe they would have just made Rogue One and kept backtracking from there. Alright, now let's talk about the TV shows that Disney is putting out. Star Wars Rebels, Empire and Rebellion. Star Wars Resistance, Empire and Rebellion. Star Wars Galaxy, Empire and Rebellion. The new live-action casting Andor, Empire and Rebellion. And guess what? The Mandalorian takes place between the Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, which means the Empire and Rebellion will be the political backdrop. Lucasfilm under Kathleen Kennedy refused to use their franchise to its greatest potential. It's especially shameful when you consider Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, games set in a period 4,000 years before the original trilogy. Their creative people didn't feel constrained to stick close to the material in George Lucas's movies, and explored some of the potential in Star Wars. And they are great games that managed to expand the universe. Lucasfilm had a perfect example of how to stray away from the original trilogy right in front of them, and they didn't care to look. The DDU is especially disappointing considering the expanded universe that was available to Disney when they bought Star Wars. There was a wealth of usable material, and when Disney made it non-canon, we the fans thought that meant they were going to simply rearrange the best storylines and characters into something for theaters. Kind of like how the MCU picks and chooses their version of characters and storylines and crafts it into one single narrative. That would have been great. But there is zero innovation over at Lucasfilm. And you want to know why? Employees there are proud of the fact that they don't know Star Wars. That's according to an ex-employee of Lucasfilm who left his thoughts on a job review site called Glassdoor.com. Also on that site were reviews saying that senior management don't care about or know anything about Star Wars. And let's not forget that a Lucasfilm employee had a picture in their cubicle of Mark Hamill crossed out in red. Lucasfilm from the top and all the way down aren't Star Wars fans. Let that sink in. And of course, how could I forget to mention the Lucasfilm Story Group? The people in charge of the direction of Star Wars. A group of people who, if you look at their entire work history, wrote a total of 3 TV episodes prior to working at Lucasfilm. These people don't know jack about handling a franchise as large as Star Wars. nor do they want to take the heat of failing if they were to stray away from the original trilogy. That's why there's no creativity. There's no originality. They're afraid to act upon the potential of Star Wars. Basically, Star Wars is in the hands of non-passionate people, in the hands of a story group made primarily of amateurs who are afraid of failure, and in the hands of people trying to push a political agenda. And as long as Disney allows Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy to work on Star Wars, the Star Wars universe will continue to shrink. How can an intellectual property grow without creative passion involved? It can't. The DDU that replaced the EU is not worth watching, cannot inspire those who do watch, and is a perfect example of how not to develop a franchise that has such a wide scope of possibilities. At least, that's my opinion on Disney's diminished universe. But I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here at the end. Please bear with me. So a year ago was when the worst Star Wars movie hit theaters, and yet the betrayal to the Star Wars fanbase still feels fresh. But it opened our eyes and allowed us to see behind the curtain. We can identify the shills. We understand how Disney and modern media is trying to control the narrative of everything, and we have seen how truly incompetent people like Kathleen Kennedy can ruin everything we hold dear. I think The Last Jedi was the catalyst for the growing vocal outrage against SJW politics in entertainment in 2018. People had seen what happened to Ghostbusters, but it wasn't until it happened to Star Wars that normal people as a whole understood that the SJW agenda could ruin even the best franchises, and they don't want SJW politics in their own beloved franchises. If you are still there, thanks for hearing me out. Thanks for watching. Maybe hit that like button and check out some of my other videos. And
may the Force be with you.